welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your friends at Radio 2, where there are more sins committed per listener than any other radio station ever. This week we offer you an absolutely affronted Aphrodite, a devious DJ debacle, a superstar samurai spectacle, and a brazen backside blunder. See what you make of this lot. Now, we welcome to our confessional Rachel, who's doing our money today. And I'm just wondering whether you are naturally a forgiving person or not, or whether you're kind of quite a hard line. I don't know what.
I feel very privileged to be here.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure what authority I have to forgive or not to forgive,
matter.
but I do like to express an opinion.
Okay, you have as much authority.
I can be a bit judgy.
You can be a bit judgy, can you?
Yeah.
Actually, you came up with an interesting thought, just because you were saying during that last record, what happens if someone isn't forgiven? Shouldn't they have to do some
consequence?
There should be some kind of consequence.
Yes, what a great idea. Yes.
Maybe they should just send us stuff. If you don't get forgiven, should send us chocolate and beer.
Oh,
yeah.
Hello.
That was
Excellent.
They'll know
I'm
it's
sure
a
that'll
joke.
be fine. Yeah.
Doesn't break any rules, does it?
No.
Thanks for coming along. That's a very good idea. Anyway, tonight's tale comes from Don. Thank you, Don, for tonight's confession. Gather round. Are your kids going to be listening to this?
Yes,
by the way?
they are.
Okay. You might have to explain a couple of terms.
I'll leave that to my husband.
Okay, very good. Forgiving Father Simon and the Kindly Collective, my tale of forgiveness takes us back to the late autumn of 2002. I was at the time a mid-20s single man, and as our story progresses, you'll probably understand why. I'd very recently moved to Cyprus to set up my own business, and had been there just a few weeks getting things going and enjoying my new life. The son of a friend of mine of a similar age to me was visiting the island, and I'd offered to take him out for the evening. Ironically, he was the son of a Cypriot, but was born and raised in England, and this was his first visit to the island. So I, bizarrely, was the one with all the local knowledge. We therefore did the obvious cultural thing and headed straight to the newly opened Irish bar in Limassol Old Town.
Obviously.
As you would, because there's Irish-themed bars when abroad always
Yeah.
like a home from home. We spent a very pleasant couple of hours, sipping the local brew, chatting about the usual nonsense, and at some point the conversation turned unsurprisingly to that of ladies. We were both comparing our lack of ability in making the first move, especially in a busy, noisy pub-type scenario, when in walked 3 local girls. I will pick my words carefully here, but I would describe them as one stunner and her 2 mates.
Okay.
My friend and I exchanged admiring glances and then went back to our beers. Moments later, the 3 girls took up their positions right next to us at the bar and ordered their drinks. I, slightly out of character, went for it. "Hello," I said to them. "How are you?" So far, so good. In fact, pretty slick, I'd have to say. They all replied politely, and we started to chat. Now, the dynamic of their group was... one of them sat back and said absolutely nothing. The stunner, who we shall call Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, was quiet but chipped in a bit, whilst her other mate made most of the running. Having established that we were both from England, the main protagonist explained that she'd been studying at Birmingham University and had really enjoyed her time there. In fact, she fully intended to head back to the UK very soon to work longer term. Whilst I found her enthusiasm for conversation delightful, the simple fact was that I wanted to get Aphrodite a little bit more involved. So I asked if she had ever been to England. "Yes," she replied, "I've been studying in Bristol." "Well, this is terrific," I exclaimed with added interest. "And what do you hope to do next?" And this, Father Simon, is where it got weird. She replied, "I would like to do page 3.
What?
Well, this was like all my Christmases coming at once, says Don. So I took half a step back, looked her up and down, gave what I thought was a reassuring and approving nod and said, "Yeah, why not? Good for you." Her face changed. "Why did you look at me like that?" she asked, in a manner best described as stern. Oh dear, I thought something has clearly been lost in translation. Maybe page 3 in Cyprus isn't the same as page 3 in England. Well, you said you wanted to do page 3. "Yes," she said. "But why did you look at me?" My mind was whirring. "Well, do you want to do page 3 in England?" I asked. "Yes, of course." "Okay, do you know what page 3 is in England?" "Yes." So I was struggling, but her face was like thunder, and I feared I was losing the battle. "Let's get this straight," I said. "You want to go back to England and do page 3 modelling in the Sun newspaper?" "No," she shrieked, "not page 3. I want to do my PhD." Oh. Well, at this juncture, my friend and I simply corpsed into a crumpled heap on the floor. Tears of laughter pouring. Suffice to say, our conversation with Aphrodite and her lovely chums came to a grinding halt. So I seek forgiveness on two fronts. Firstly, of course, to Aphrodite, who I imagine was somewhat embarrassed as a result of my utterly stupid banter. And secondly, to my new mate, who, without a shadow of a doubt, lost any chance of romance that evening. In my defence, I learnt from my errors, and just a few months later, I did meet the girl of my dreams, my now wife, in a different pub, when, believe it or not, she sat down next to me at the bar, and I made a slightly more refined first move. But anyway, it all boiled down to the fact that there's the way she said it could have been page 3, could have been a PhD. There's a slight difference in there. Don needs the forgiveness. We turn first to Sister Rachel. What do you say, Sister Rachel?
Oh, it wasn't really his fault.
No. There's a conversation in your house at the moment. Dad,
That's all I can think of.
what's a PhD? That's what they're saying.
Yeah, and he'll explain, you
Yeah.
know, higher education.
What do you think?
I think, I'll forgive him.
Can I forgive
Not
him?
his fault.
Not his fault.
Well, maybe he should have listened a bit more closely and not made certain assumptions.
So you're not being too judgy?
No, slightly judgy, but not as judgy as I usually am.
You're just holding it back just a
Yeah.
little.
Yeah.
Sister Bobby from the Priory.
Well, he's the one that lost out because for a moment he'd like said all his Christmases came together at once.
Yes.
And then they were never there in the first place. What's really sad about that is actually I think that's such a lovely, innocent and hilarious mistake to make. You'd kind of thought that would have bonded the group. They've all laughed together and had fun together and all got married and lived happily ever after. So, no, you know, the only real victim was him, really, wasn't it?
Yes.
Because he lost it for the
so
group.
he's telling it at his own expense.
Yeah, you're forgiven. Of
He's
course
forgiven.
you are.
All right, Brother Matthew now.
How are you confusing PhD and page 3? They start with the same letter and they have an E at the end, but that's it. And I would say also that the only reason he's mixing those up is because of his own preconceptions there about the ladies in the pub. So I am going to say not forgiven, because clearly he was living in the 70s.
Have you ever said
with his-
page 3 with a Cypriot accent, though?
But-
Have you ever said that?
No, I'm not going to try, because
No.
I will get it wrong by sounding
Do you
silly.
not think that page 3 could...
No, it's just
I want you to do
P.
a
There's a P
page
at the
3.
start. There's an E at the end. That's the only similarity
Right.
between those two things.
5:45, Radio 2. Let's get on with it. Here's tonight's confession. It comes from Pete. Thank you, Pete, for tonight's tale. Dear Simon and your forgiving fraternity, my story dates back to a time when I was desperate to become a radio DJ. In order to achieve this ambition, at the age of about 14, I became a volunteer presenter at a hospital radio station. Well, I think we've all done that. Some of us have. Somewhere in England, I presented the Tuesday evening show. Over the weeks, I began honing my DJ skills. Hoping that there was a patient in the hospital who just so happened to be the head of BBC Radio, I would do everything I could to impress the not-so-well audience with my endearing on-air patter. And let's face it, compared with the other DJs on this hospital radio station, no one could talk up to the vocals on a song like I could, though the station boss did tell me off once for trying it on Beethoven's Ninth, where the intro lasts at least 5 minutes. I don't think it's a thing in classical music, really. I don't think they do it there anyway. All was going well until one day the station boss introduced me to his newest recruit. Let's call him Andrew. It was suggested that Tuesday evenings should now have 2 shows. First, my request show. Then, Andrew would later take over with Music into the Night. Andrew's on-air technique was different to mine. I favoured the Kenny Everett approach. Wild, fun, wacky, lots of stuff to make poorly listeners feel real jolly whilst recovering in the hospital wards. Andrew's approach was different to mine. He was refined, articulate, a tad more slick than me. But I couldn't help feeling miffed that my on-air presence had now been halved, thanks to Andrew taking over the decks at 8 p.m. The weeks went on, and although I was now used to Andrew taking over the mic halfway through my show, I still felt that he was stealing my thunder. And then one week, Andrew walked into the studio and announced to me that he had a cracker of a show lined up. Out of his bag, he pulled out a cassette tape, yes, because we use those lots in hospital radio, and announced that he'd managed to secure an exclusive interview with ABBA.
Wow.
I mean, yes. I say, you and the multi-million record-selling global pop god and goddess phenomenon that is ABBA? Yes, replies Andrew, the ABBA. Andrew left the studio for a short while, and during his absence, I started to work out how on earth he'd managed to secure such an incredible exclusive. ABBA, after all, were at the time the biggest act on the planet. They were untouchable. Major newspapers and broadcast organisations had enough difficulty getting any interviews with this band. So how did this very young teenager with no journalistic experience from a minuscule hospital radio station manage to be granted an audience with the legends that are ABBA? With great trepidation, I picked up the orange-labelled BASF cassette tape, pressed the pre-fade button on the desk, and started to listen. To my utter surprise and annoyance, I heard Andrew asking questions and ABBA answering them. This cannot be right, I thought. It's impossible. How on earth did he make this happen? The only way, my thought continued, this interview could have been made is that Andrew has found a recording of an existing ABBA interview and replaced the interviewer's voice with his own. But what if it was a genuine interview? What if Andrew did actually meet the band and get an exclusive interview? That would mean Andrew would have a better show than mine, and that cannot happen. So after about 1 second's worth of consideration, I did what any suspicious, wary, resentful and jealous teenage hospital radio DJ would do. Andrew walked back into the studio. I pretended to be busy queuing up jingles and records. You see my tape? Andrew asked. Sorry, mate, no, hang on, I've got a link to do. I dusted off a Jim Reeves album, queued up another track, another hit going out. Andrew's methodical search eventually turned into blind panic. Darting around the studio, he repeatedly lifted album covers, opened drawers, looked under the desk, checked cupboards, checked his coat, checked his bag. The cassette, on its own accord, had miraculously disappeared. Whilst all this was happening, and admittedly feeling rather tense, I pretended to concentrate on my show, occasionally pretending to look for the elusive cassette tape, which in reality, as you might have guessed, was discreetly planted in my back pocket. The expression on Andrew's face eventually turned from alarm to despair. With a minute to the start of his show and with great resignation, he took over us at the seat that I now vacated. "Gotta go, mate, I'm going to miss the bus," I said, and made a swift exit from the studio. No doubt Andrew's show that night wasn't his best. Although I felt a tiny bit guilty for what I had done, I managed to reassure myself with the thought that I had saved the listening hospital patients, who were already ill, from something that would cause them even more pain if they ever found out the truth. This is how I rationalised it. However, I need to ask for two different types of forgiveness. If the tape did contain a genuine interview that Andrew had conducted with ABBA, I seek forgiveness for the heinous deed of hiding the tape and causing so much distress. Though I know he recovered from it, and I hear nowadays he's an established professional radio presenter broadcasting to the world.
Wow. Hello. What?
And if Andrew had cobbled the interview together from an existing recording, I ask you and your collective to forgive Andrew for his deed, and I hope that he learned a valuable lesson in radio journalism and so has become a better broadcaster as a result of his actions when he was learning the trade. An intriguing tale. I do not know who this other DJ was. But anyway, Pete, the hospital radio DJ, stole his ABBA interview. Matt's worked it out who it is. He's going to tell us in a minute.
No.
Okay. Rebecca.
This is an extraordinary tale, because if it's true that Andrew is a famous DJ who made up this interview with ABBA, then that is a really big story. If it's also true that Andrew had an exclusive interview and Pete hid the tape, that is also unbelievable and just so horrendous to even contemplate. I just can't believe he did that. Horrible. I mean, okay, professional jealousy is one thing, but could you even imagine doing...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Seriously?
No, of course not.
I think...
It'd be unethical.
That is completely unforgivable. Sorry.
It's against all the ethics of broadcasting, and no one
and
here...
just so mean.
And very, very mean. Sister Bobby from the Priory.
I mean, I'm exactly in Rebecca's footsteps. It is a really mean thing to do. And all it does, it shows up your inadequacies, because obviously you didn't have it in you. He raised the bar for you, and you didn't follow. What you did, you was a snake.
Loser, Pete.
Yeah, you are unforgiven, and he's made it, and I don't know what you're doing now. It's fine, you might have chosen another career, but, you know, maybe.
Let's see if we get some harsh words here.
What's it, if he's got this massive interview with ABBA, what's he doing abandoning the tape in Pete's studio? You would if that's a real interview with ABBA, you keep that tape close to you, and he didn't, and that's why I don't think it's a real interview. I think deep down this is him testing Pete and trying to see whether he's a decent ethical broadcaster, and he's clearly not. There's a shock, unethical broadcaster. So I am going to say forgiven, just because.
Speak for yourself.
We'd all do it. Yeah, we would.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
So
Fine.
yes, forgiven.
So do you forgive Pete, yes or no? Whose side of this are
yes.
you on?
No.
Okay. So here we are, it's BBC Radio 2, we're at the Folk Awards, it's 5:45. That does not mean, though, that we get away from a confession. Oh no, in fact, what it means is that we have a slightly more glamorous confession than normal. Because it's not me just reading some old guff out. What we have is a real-life folk hero telling a load of guff. That's what it is. Martin Carthy, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
And a good afternoon. Very lovely to see you back at the Folk Awards.
It's nice to be here, thank you.
And on our confessing panel, Rebecca and Bobby as normal, but Mark Radcliffe has joined us.
Hello, good afternoon.
And it's your big show tonight, so I imagine you're really...
Yeah, my show. Everybody's just coming on my show. It's mainly about me, and the awards are just a side order.
Is that the way it goes? Okay. Are you a naturally forgiving person, Mark? I'm not quite sure whether you...
I would like to think so. I thought I was less tolerant in my younger years, when we had to fight our way to the top, Simon. You remember those hard days?
Yeah,
those hard days of struggle at the coalface of popular culture.
The late 80s, they were tough.
I mean, they were dark times, but now we've mellowed with age, and
right. So, Martin, we've invited you along because you've been around for so very many decades.
Very long.
We thought that from your book of showbiz confession anecdotes,
My shameful book.
Your shameful book,
of
there
shame.
might be a story that sort of springs to mind, something that you'd like to confess, and then we can sit in judgment on you.
Well, one or two people have heard this story before. It's 1962. It's the coldest winter ever. It's the first white Christmas for I don't know how long. And it's an evening, late, like 2 o'clock in the morning. Arrived back home at 184 Haverstock Hill with my then wife Dorothy, a couple of other people, and Bob Dylan, who was he was overdoing a BBC play a wonderful play called Madhouse on Castle Street.
Hang on, so you're with Bob Dylan?
Yes.
He's just hanging around with you as a mate?
Absolutely. He's overdoing the play. And he's come to the Troubadour, and I've invited him back for a cup of tea and a sausage sandwich, and he's very happy to come along.
Was that the kind of thing that did it for him in those days?
That's the kind of thing that did it for him in those days. Maybe he thought it was in code, but in fact it turned out to be a cup of tea and a sausage sandwich was it.
Rock and roll!
Oh boy, you ain't heard nothing yet. Okay. So we walked through the door, and my wife Dorothy then says to me, "Make a fire, Mart." So I picked up the samurai sword, which was a gift from my...
Hang on a second, what?
I picked up my samurai sword, which was my present from my pretend Auntie Emily, who had in her passport the word actress, but in fact did interesting work for the government, if you get my drift.
She was a spy?
Well, she worked for those interesting people, yes.
But she was not a real aunt?
Well, she wasn't. She was a pretend. She was a great friend of my family. So, and you called, at my age, you called friends of your family auntie and uncle, didn't you?
Okay.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
So that's what we did. And I picked up the samurai sword and I took a swing at what was left of the piano that was in our room. And Bob immediately stepped between me and the piano and said, "You can't do that, man. That's a musical instrument." And I said, the equivalent of, "It's a piece of junk, get out of the way." And he stood aside and I started to take a swing, and I hadn't quite taken one swing when I heard this little voice behind me right in my ear saying, "Can I have a go?" And it was him. So I handed him the samurai sword and he began chopping up the piano, which by then time had no keys and no nice bits in front to make it look pretty. It was just the frame. Right? So we chopped up the piano.
You and Bob Dylan?
Chopped up the piano, and there was more of it we had some more for next week and other cold days, and we chopped up bits of the piano, and we built a fire, and we all stayed nice and warm and had our sausage sandwiches and our cups of tea, and eventually he took a taxi home. To the hotel.
Was there not sort of a closer supply of ready chopped wood and kindling or something?
No. Well, there was.
You had to destroy a piano.
You could get orange boxes. Well, my mate, who I'd known since we were both 6, who was called Bill Kay, had pushed this piano all the way up the hill from Chalk Farm to Belsize Park Station. We'd heaved it up the stairs, put it in my room, and then he'd gone away and forgotten about it. 30 years later, he told me that he was actually going to fix the piano up, but he was laughing when he said it, and it would have been an impossible job.
Had ale been consumed, Martin?
No, as a matter of fact, the Troubadour didn't serve ale. It served coffee.
So it really was a cup of tea and a sausage sandwich, and to make a fire, samurai sword, old piano, you and Bob.
Absolutely.
There you go. How about that? An extraordinary story. Okay, rock and roll.
The only bit of the piano, I would say, the only bit of the piano that didn't get chopped up was the soundboard, and that went to a guitar maker called John Bailey, who had originally taught woodwork at Haverstock School before it was a comprehensive.
Very important that we knew exactly where it went.
Yes.
Okay, so Martin Carthy wants forgiveness for destroying a perfectly good piano with Bob Dylan. Rebecca, what do you say?
I have to say that story was so rock and roll. It lived up to many stereotypes I have of people like yourself and Bob Dylan. No, I'm glad to say that it did. You spent a lot of effort getting that piano into your flat, so it seems like a shame to have wrecked it just to keep yourselves warm.
It had been in the flat for for at least 7 months.
And you weren't using it. It was old and knackered
and it was
and out
old,
of tune,
completely
presumably.
knackered. It was completely useless.
I suppose, in fact, the only way it had any use is to keep you warm.
Exactly.
Therefore, I'm going to forgive you.
Okay.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sister Bobby, what do you think?
Martin, hello.
Hello.
Crimes against pianos. It did sound actually terrible. But what I would love about this is, you're right, it kept you warm. Great bit of upcycling at the end.
Yes.
And recycling, so fantastic. And the best fantasy folktale I think I have ever heard.
Fantasy folktale, yeah. Mark Radcliffe, what do you think there with Martin Carthy?
I just love the fact that Martin's wife said to him, get the fire started, Martin. The first thing you reach for, not firelighters or matches or the coal scuttle, of course, the samurai sword. Where's my samurai sword when I need it?
It's been left here by the spy, you know.
Right, yeah. I have some sympathy with Martin because I've just moved a sort of chapel upright piano down the stairs at my house. I was worried about damaging the piano on its way out. The piano came out perfectly well. That we just had to we sort of semi-demolished one of the walls on the turn of the stairs. So that was the problem. But I think it shows shameless and scandalous disregard for an instrument of great beauty. So I just can't forgive this heartless behaviour demonstrated by Bob Dylan and Martin Carthy, just trading on their reputations to get away with disastrous acts of vandalism like this. So I can't allow forgiveness on this, I'm afraid.
Okay,
much as I like Martin very much.
We'll put it down
although he's gone slightly down in my estimation this afternoon.
So what do we have here? Well, we have a very interesting tale from Wife of Lump. That's what it says. Dear Father Simon and the collective, whilst driving home from a visit to friends one Sunday afternoon, my husband, and he is the Lump, a family nickname, decided to get the wrong end of the stick whilst we were having a discussion. This progressed into a very slight disagreement, to which the Lump decided the appropriate response would be a hissy fit, and ultimately a swift withdrawal from any further conversation. We continued in silence until he pulled into the car park of the supermarket superstore close to home. I'm going in to get a bottle of cognac.
Great. How often have we done that on the confession? Yeah.
Could only end in trouble. Are you coming in to get anything? This being the Lump's attempt at reconciliation, I presumed. When we were in the store entrance, I decided to hold my ground and announced haughtily, I need some yoghurt for breakfast. I'll meet you in the cognac aisle. We parted company. Time passed. With a large pot of yoghurt in each hand, I made my way to the cognac aisle. A whole aisle for cognac, imagine that. And upon reaching the appropriate location, I became aware that something pretty bad must have just happened. The Lump was standing with his back pinned up against bottles on the side of the aisle facing my approach. Both of his hands were raised in a submissive gesture, and his face was blood red with what appeared to be embarrassment. Excuse me. I couldn't see into the aisle at this stage, and my imagination went wild. Had he knocked a bottle over and then a domino effect resulting in smashed glass and hundreds of pounds worth of cognac flooding the aisle? My stomach turned. Would we have to pay for the damage? As I turned into the aisle, I scanned the area for damage, but there wasn't a broken bottle in sight. There was, however, a lady and her elderly mother standing, facing the Lump. The lady had an equally red face, and the mother seemed to be quite amused by the situation whilst leaning on her Zimmer frame. What on earth had happened? The Lump blurted out quickly, I pinched her bum, I pinched her bum.
What?
I couldn't decide if this was a statement of bravado or a confession, and my face must have translated this dilemma as the Lump once again blurted, I pinched her bum, I thought it was you.
Oh, no!
The lady still looked furious, but it was at this point I noticed that myself and the furious lady were both wearing very similar outfits. We were both wearing jeans, brown boots and the same style of jumper. We both had the same length copper colour hair. She was, however, 4'10", a good foot shorter than me. In an attempt to diffuse the situation, I stepped forward and in a very gentle and relaxed manner joked with the lady, well, luckily for you, we look very similar, don't you think? I'm quite relieved. If you'd been 6'2" and long blonde hair, I'd be very worried. The furious lady looked at my clothing and then at hers, then at our hairstyles and the copper colouring, and suddenly her face seemed to take on a look of relief. Phew. Thank goodness, I thought, now how to get out of here before security turns up. The lump apologised several more times to the lady while standing closely at my side like a chided schoolboy. We all said our goodbyes, and both parties made their way to the exit. I did notice, however, that the elderly mother still appeared to be amused and was smiling broadly at the memory of the situation. As we exited the store, the lump stopped me and looked into my eyes with a look of confession. He said, "I didn't just pinch her bum."
What?
Really?
Oh, no.
No. When I got to the aisle, the lady was crouched down.
Oh, what?
Looking on the bottom shelf, and I saw the jeans and the jumper and the same coloured hair, and I thought it was you, and I didn't want to leave the store without speaking to you, so I decided to make up. What have you done? The lump went even redder in the face and proceeded to confess the actual events. Well, I was going to grab your bum, but as I saw you crouch down, I noticed that your jeans had ridden down just a little bit too far.
No.
So I thought I'd make light of it all, and so I reached in to hoist your pants up.
Oh, what?
I mean her pants, but I was trying to make you more decent and... Anyway, Father Simon, I was more caught up in the fact that my husband had made an effort to make up with me than to be angry with him until he continued. So the lady spun round and glared at me, and I was still leaning over her, and all I managed to say was, "You're not my wife! You're not my wife!" And I still had my hand down the back of her jeans.
Oh, what?
We continued to stare at each other whilst my hand remained where it was. I just froze until I heard her mother began to chuckle. And that's when I jumped back against the aisle with my hands in the air. By this time, he was talking very quickly and animatedly. I was so scared, as you'd been what felt like ages, and I thought you'd probably stormed off and left the store, and I thought the lady might start shouting and call security, and when I had to explain to them that I thought the lady was you, my wife, they would ask where you were. And I thought I might not be able to find you. The lump looked desperately into my eyes for sympathy and forgiveness, of which he received neither. I burst into laughter. "I only left you for 2 minutes, tops. How can one person cause so much trouble in 2 minutes?" Father Simon, if you knew the lump, you could cause an argument between road signs. At this point, the lady and her mother slowly passed us at the exit. The lady still looked flushed and a little embarrassed, and her mother still chuckled. Therefore, I need forgiveness, please, not from the lady who was eventually accepting of my husband's rambling apologies, not from the elderly mother who probably experienced the more exciting chapter of her life that afternoon, nor to the store security staff who were probably highly entertained whilst monitoring the only aisle with camera surveillance. I do, however, seek forgiveness from my husband, the lump, for leaving him alone in a store unsupervised during a mild tantrum. More importantly, I seek forgiveness from him for telling this tale to anybody and everybody that would listen, family, friends, work colleagues, you name it. I did also tell him that one day I would write to you to confess on your behalf, but he didn't believe me. Still finding it funny. Wife of lump. Well, you know, he was trying to do the right thing. He was motivated only by trying to make up with his wife. He was utterly mortified. Let's see what Sister Rebecca makes of
That
it.
is one of the most cringeworthy confessions ever.
Yeah.
And my toes were literally
Like
curling.
ever?
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 My toes were curling during that. Also because I think we've all done something similar,
What?
haven't we? Yes, we have, Bobby. You see, Bobby has as
Bobby's
well.
nodding.
Yeah. So I think, because it happens often, I was going to get really angry with him because I was thinking, typical, he didn't notice that the other one was a foot smaller than his wife, but she was crouching down.
crouching
So
down,
therefore,
crouching down.
you know, I kind of forgive him for that. And I also forgive the wife for leaving him alone because she wasn't to know that he was going to try and make up. So everyone is forgiven.
Everyone seems to be perfectly fine. Now, Bobby, what happened? So you've done something similar, have you?
Yes. I was at a record fair and the man I loved was standing next to me, so I tucked my hand in his back pocket.
And it wasn't him.
Wasn't him? What was interesting, because then the man I loved appeared on my left-hand side.
Who is this cad?
Who said, "What's going on?" And the man next to me said, "Oh." And I went, that's... And it was a bit embarrassing.
Yeah.
There you go, so I apologise. So
forgiven.
basically, if he's forgiven, because I have been just as daft.
All right. Brother Matthew.
Oh, well, I mean, call me a prude, but I always find, I mean, hoisting up your wife's pants in supermarkets.
For the sake of decency.
Good
Well,
point.
no, even if it's your wife, I think I would announce myself and say, my dear.
Also, would
maybe,
she wouldn't be that happy about it, would she? Even if it was his wife.
Yes. So I'm going to say, but he is actually. I mean, he's been referred to throughout this as lump. So I think he's suffered indignity
That's
enough.
true.
So I am going to forgive just because of that. But
Okay.
let's try and announce ourselves before
Before doing similar.
hoisting.
CBC
I know, pretty extraordinary. And it may well be that you think, I've done something like that, and it's inspired a confession of your own. Well, on an email, please. confessions@bbc.co.uk. More in a week, and the Weekly Mayo available to download now and every Friday. Thank you so much.